Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Marin Wildfire Protection Authority Community Oversight Committee on Wednesday, March 26, 2025. So let's begin with a roll call.
Certainly, Chair McCauley, beginning with Member Pat Randolph and Member Jim Wagner
Present.
and Vice Chair Jenny Biggs
Here.
and Chair McCauley.
I'm also here.
And for the sake of the minutes, it looks like Member Pat Randolph will not be joining us today. Apologies. Rebecca Suggs will not be joining us today. Pat Randolph is here. Theo Hellman is a non-voting member, and Member Larry Minikis has not arrived just yet.
Okay, so we have a quorum. So let's begin with item number 3, which is agenda adjustments. Are there any adjustments proposed for the agenda? Okay, and number 4 is open time for public expression. Are there members of the public on the call?
There are not, but for the sake of process, we can go ahead and read the public expression message. Would you like for me to do that, sir?
Sure, go ahead.
The public is welcome to address the Community Oversight Committee at this time on matters not on the agenda that are within the jurisdiction of the committee. Please be advised that pursuant to the Government Code Section 54954.2, the committee is not permitted to discuss or take action on any matter not on the agenda. Comments may be no longer than 2 minutes and should be respectful to the community. Please silence your cell phones during the meeting and mute your microphone when not reporting out. For those joining us by phone, you may press 9 to raise your hand and star 6 to mute or unmute yourself. Chair McCauley, there are currently no online or in-person attendees at this time.
Okay, as we go through each agenda item, I'll just make a check with you to determine whether there are people online so that they can comment if they so wish. Next up is the Executive Officer's Report.
Good evening, everybody. I'll keep it, or wait, it's not evening yet. It just looks like evening when I look out the window. Good afternoon, everybody. Really busy week for Marin Wildfire in a good way. We're still about halfway through our work plan process. We typically start that November, December. Here we are almost in April, and we will be bringing the full work plan to the Board of Directors in May. The JPA-wide projects are rounded out, and now we're working on the individual zones and the individual member agency projects. The reason why it's a busy week is yesterday we had the opportunity to host a Climate and Wildfire Institute spring convening. Great opportunity to learn from others, to network, and actually had some opportunities for Marin Wildfire to start participating in some interesting endeavors here in the near future. Tonight, we will be hosting what we are calling the keynote speaking event, which is a bridge between the Climate and Wildfire Institute and the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force, which starts tomorrow. And the keynote speaker will be Daniel Swain, UCLA professor, and basically one of the most listened to climatologists, I think, in the West Coast. And he has a great way of making the complicated science of climatology understandable. And what I like about the way Daniel presents his message is it's not all doomsday. He actually describes a path forward and how we can create solutions towards the climate rather than just a doomsday type messaging, which I really appreciate. And then tomorrow we're hosting the statewide Wildfire Forest and Resilience Task Force meeting. It'll be a series of different panel discussions. The first one will be an update on lessons learned from the LA fires. The next one will be discussing potentially discussing the executive order from the governor, exempting some environmental processes. And one of the message that we've been pushing through with Marin Wildfire is that we worked hard to develop trust with our environmental stakeholders, and we are not going to violate that trust. We are going to continue to adhere to the requirements, environmental requirements. However, if there's an opportunity to exercise the exemptions to speed up the bureaucratic process to get us to the point where we can put our projects on the ground while still following all the mandates of CEQA and everything else, then that's how we're going to exercise those exemptions, both in order to get to projects faster, but also to potentially save money on the bureaucratic process to get to those projects. Therefore, that would mean more money towards projects. And the next panel discussion will be about Marin Wildfire, to talk about how we came about, how we built the organization, what we were doing. And then the last portion of that panel will be what our relationship is with our land management agencies. It was pointed out to us by the members of the task force, not us. It was pointed out by other people that we have one of the strongest relationships between wildfire prevention and our land management agencies. And they want to learn on how we got there so that other areas of the state can be as cooperative. And I think an important message that we'll dig into tomorrow, that relationship wasn't always there. And it took a lot of work to get the relationship to where we could get there. There will also be a panel discussion on data sharing and how to share that data with the public in an effective way, which coincides with, not on accident, with us launching our public-facing dashboards tomorrow. And that is, we have a very effective, I think, comprehensive dashboard for our vegetation management that's available on our website now, and a comprehensive dashboard on defensible space. And so we're using tomorrow as our opportunity to launch it formally launch it to the public. And then the final panel discussion will be about the Fire Foundry and a similar program in Southern California on creating sustainable career pathways. So we're super excited about being able to host that. And then Friday is a series of site visits in and around Marin. I can take any questions.
So you mentioned a couple of databases. Are those like county-wide measurements, or what exactly do they show?
So for the defensible space stuff right now, it's just our core projects. And we'll start incorporating non-core projects into it. But since it's our strategic measures for the core stuff, we're just including what's Marin Wildfire, the metrics on the Marin Wildfire projects. But we are working with OneTAM with a desire to have a single map that has all vegetation management projects on it so that the public can go to one place, because the city of San Rafael has projects that they're funding. The city of Vail Valley has projects they're funding. There's projects that are funded by CAL FIRE that has no Marin Wildfire involvement. And it would be good to have a single map for the residents to see it. And then the DSpace dashboard will be all of Marin except for Tiburon and Belvedere.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Other questions? Okay, next, yes.
I'm just curious as to where you're taking them on the
different tours we have. I'll try to start from the north and work south. Is we have the Greater Nevada Shaded Fuel Break, China Camp, Cam Rancho, Tomales Bay State Park, and Muir Woods are the ones I can remember off the top of my head. And Muir Woods would be, both Muir Woods and Tomales Bay State Park would be examples of projects that are not receiving Marin Wildfire funding. So it would be good to have visibility for the public to see them.
Other questions? Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda is the consent calendar. Are there any members of the public around at this point?
There are currently no hands.
Okay, good. So now there is a question before us as to whether we will approve the minutes of the February 26th Community Oversight Committee meeting. Is there a motion?
Second.
All those in favor? We have to take a roll call, I guess? Nope. Okay. All those in favor say aye. Okay, it passes unanimously. Okay, next item, which is an action item, is the fiscal year 23-24 COC report, something I'm very excited to talk about. I started with a little overview memo. I thought for the three of us who were very involved in it, we wanted to kind of be able to connect the dots for the rest of you to put it all together. So let me very briefly review that. You'll recall that there was an issue with getting core completed because a couple of resignations. So we had a mission to do the core review. We decided this last cycle that, because we always do it a little differently, this last cycle, because core has got so many eyes on it, we were going to focus on smaller core projects and see whether there was a good database to support the expenditures, that the expenditures are reasonable, et cetera. So the committee of Pat, Rebecca, and myself went through and completed that task, and we'll review that in a minute. The other thing we were supposed to do is assemble the earlier work to get that in a uniform manner, which we've also done. So here are the sections. So what we've got is, if you take a look at the prior year report, there's, if you don't mind me to use the word boilerplate, there's a fair amount of boilerplate that exists within the prior year report, and then we insert into it essentially our work product. Our intention this year is to bring that boilerplate forward and then just insert in the new elements, which we're going to review today. And if in fact we are satisfied with those elements, we would possibly be in a position where we could seek a vote as to whether we could issue the report, and then we would get together and just do the final assembly and pass it out. If there are remaining open items, of course, we don't have to do that today. So we'll just see how the day goes. So in terms of the elements that you've all been presented with, the first one is a letter from the chair, which is me. It doesn't seek any approval, but if there's any recommendations from anybody who's had a chance to read through it, I'd love to entertain them. Are there any thoughts on what I wrote there? Basically, it just said, hey, we're getting better every year. The rollover is becoming smaller and our findings have dropped significantly. In fact, we only have follow-up from prior comments in the cycle, and we've gone down from about 18 months to get a report out to hopefully 9 months if we approve it today. So we're moving in the right direction. So that's what that does. Next up is Elise's financial report and the related Excel spreadsheets with the rollover to be inserted. So basically what we have there is, you'll recall in the early years when Larry Chu was around, we would as a group go through all the financial data ourselves and assemble it and confirm that it was in compliant with all the various elements of the JPA agreement. As we matured, we said, we shouldn't be doing that. Staff should be doing that. And we also, through discussion with the CPA, have arranged that all the data, which is in Elise's report, will also be reflected in the audited financial statements, right? So that report is before us, and the only thing left to do is to wait for the CPA to issue their financial statements and then tie our numbers to their numbers. So in order to be expeditious about it, let me go to my window here. What we put in the report is, I'll just read it, it's 3 paragraphs. The primary role of the MWPA Community Oversight Committee is to report on the spending of the parcel tax funds and the previous year's work to evaluate consistency with the tax measure as defined in the JPA agreement, MWPA goals and objectives, in the tax ordinance. What follows is the financial matrix section of the report prepared by the MWPA treasurer and approved by the MWPA executive director. This report indicates that MWPA is compliant with the measure, so it makes that statement throughout the document. The COC will agree the financial data in this section to the financial statements of the audit. I put the formal title in there. As soon as it is issued, our C report is subject to revision based on this review step. So this will not prevent us from issuing. We'll just know that in the background, once the CPA report comes out, we take a quick read through it to make sure that it ties and it's done. So that's what we're doing in this section. I would entertain any questions or comments with regards to what Elisa wrote there.
Question.
Sure.
Paragraph 3.
Paragraph 3 of
what you just read, the background.
Yeah.
The first 5 words, the COC will agree on what? I didn't understand that.
All financial data in this section. So what follows is the various metrics that state the rules essentially of the JPA agreement. So we're not supposed to issue any bonds where there aren't any. Administrative costs should not be more than 10%. They are less than 10%. 20% of the procedure for D space and 20% are for local. And then we confirm that those checks have gone out to the various entities as required, and they went out in the amount of 20%. So we didn't give 40% for D space, we gave 20%, right? As far as the 60% was concerned, we lay out the requirements of the 60%, the indication that 80% of the 60% of the funds must be within each of the groups, all that data. And there is a table at the end of the document which shows the status of everything. And so all those numbers essentially are in compliance with the.
I think those are the missing words. That's the missing phrase. Will agree, blah, 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 are in compliance.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
Right. Exactly. Okay. And that's what we said in the second paragraph. What follows in this financial metrics section is a report prepared by MWPA treasurer and approved by the MWPA executive officer. The report indicates MWPA compliance with the measure. So that's how that all fits together. So does that hang together for you?
With the addition of the clause to the sentence, but it's a minor point.
This report indicates MWPA compliance with the measure. That's what's in the document.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. Okay, so that is that. Let me see. I'm going to be doing a lot of windowing here today. There. So, oops, wrong one. After that, there. After that, okay. So then what we have is core, DSpace, and local. We'll walk through each of those next. We will indicate that in addition for local and DSpace, in addition to the findings we've already seen previously, what we did is we updated it for prior year findings, staff statements about compliance, and then MWPA consideration as to whether we agree that the compliance is either met or not met. That's new stuff. So in the case where we, as a subcommittee of three, felt it was pretty obvious, we went ahead and put in words. Where there are items for further discussion, we will now discuss them as we go through each of the three areas. So that's kind of how that all fits together. And then finally, depending on how far we get, we'll have a final conclusion. So that's kind of what was in the letter I sent to you. And with that, I think we're able to move on to the core report. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes, thank you, John, for this.
Good. All right. So then let me find core. There. Okay. So as far as core is concerned, I'll give you the elevator speech. Basically, we went to the lowest one-third of projects. We sat down and we put Mark in a room with a big spotlight on him. And then we walked through each of the items. And in each case, he was able to provide us with, from the database, underlying documents, which were supportive of the expenditures. I mean, it'd be easy, like if it was the goats, we got a bill from the goat guy, right? Okay. And we walked through each of those items and we saw that the bills were consistent with the expressed task. And in some cases, it got pretty complicated because Novato and San Rafael have aggregate bills within a month. So there's a lot of small parts that make up the big part, but we didn't do 100% reperformance, but we could see underlying elements which kind of all tied together. So we completed that section and basically, formed a conclusion that everything hung together. We said, the executive officer exhibited a detailed knowledge of the records and an alacrity, I like that word, in navigating through the records. This added to our impression that MWPA staff were well engaged in their oversight. These expenditures have multiple levels of committee and board review, and the healthy pressure of multiple agencies competing for MWPA funds is present. This is a lower risk area given all the levels of review and the larger size of the programs. COC efforts focus more on a review of the work plan than assessing the local due diligence efforts. This review level was sufficient for us to meet our requirement to review expenditures for compliance with the tax measures. So basically, we had no findings in this section. We thought everything hung together. So that's what we did there. And then after that, I'd like to walk through each of the recommendations from the prior year, which we just basically pasted in from the prior report. The comment from staff, and then our view as to whether we agreed with staff that the item was implemented. So with that, I'd like to run through each of those with us as a group, if that's okay. Okay.
Would it be helpful if I did a screen share, or you guys feel good with what you have?
I think we have it in front of us.
Okay.
Okay. So there's a series, I'm not going to, read it word for word, but basically the comments were first recommendation, you should make sure that the spreadsheets match the numbers. There was a problem in the prior year where things didn't hang together. Staff said they agreed. And then we agree that that particular one has been implemented without a problem. Just interrupt if you have any disagreement or want to discuss it further. Next one, project completions should be verified. Projects should only be marked complete on staff spreadsheets if they have been completed at the time the spreadsheet is submitted to the COC. Staff said we partially agree. Staff concurs that projects should be marked as complete on the spreadsheets when delivered to the COC only if they are complete. Currently, Marin Wildfire does not observe at verify completion, does observe verify completion of larger projects, but not all projects. Staff does not believe it is necessary or appropriate to perform status checks on all projects after a member agency reports the project as complete. So I said open for discussion because the three of us had differing views about our sense of that. So why don't we express what do you think?
Well, I
Mike.
I mentioned that perhaps the COC could go and take a look at smaller projects to see whether they were actually complete or not. I don't know that we need to go see all of them, but we could go see a random sample of some of the smaller projects.
So my view of that is that once we start doing work, we're no longer an oversight organization. We become part of the management of the organization. And again, my view, just one, is that there are operational activities that the board does, and then there are, if you will, financial activities that make us ensure that we're compliant with the measures. I think it's reasonable to expect that boards would keep track of projects and their status. To me, there's always a gray line about where we should and we shouldn't comment. I wasn't offended by staff's viewpoint that the big stuff gets a lot of eyeballs, the small stuff is small stuff, and they've seen money go out the door on the small stuff. So I was adequately comfortable with the reply, but there were different views on that. So we wanted to share it with everybody to see what everybody's views are. So, so Larry, what do you think?
This, I think that what we really have are two oversight organizations, us and the board.
Mhm.
And the board is really providing oversight on core.
Mhm.
So to your point, I don't see where we're adding value because it's something that is competitive,
Mhm.
right? So that by its very nature is being looked at very carefully. We're doing the oversight, make sure everything is okay, but whether we have to go into small projects or not, I'm comfortable with where we are today.
So are you okay with the point of view of management that the big stuff cuts out a lot of eyes on it, but there's still small stuff
There's
within
still
core?
small stuff.
Yeah, and that, it's still a part of core.
Yeah,
And I mean, I don't want to, I'm taking the other side of my point of view, but the question is it enough? Have they put enough oversight into it by not getting into the specific question of whether there's a box checked on the, turn that off. So what's the heck's going on? I know.
yeah.
You know what? That's my sister calling me twice. I think that's why it happened, because I am on silent.
John, we could make a recommendation to the board to look at a couple of the smaller projects, just as part of their routine. And that would that would address what we're discussing here. If right now their practice is to look at the big projects and not the small ones, it wouldn't hurt for them to look at the big ones and then each year take a small one or two and look at those two, just to make sure everything's in compliance.
Views on that approach?
I'm not entirely sure. Does the board actually go look at any projects?
Not physically.
No, when we have our site visits, they'll attend those, but one of the things that's funny about this comment though, or this portion of it, is the vast majority of our projects are almost forever projects. So many of them are never going to be complete.
Oh,
It's
true.
some of the little ones that will be complete. And quite frankly, I don't know if the board members are going to some of the small projects that actually do get completed. Evacuation route clearance is never going to be a completed project. The Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break will never be a completed project.
But I'm not sure what specific project this came up in conjunction with, but one thing that comes to my mind is with demonstration gardens, signage hasn't been done for most of them. That just as an example of something that, nobody said, they all checked complete and nobody said, oh, but we haven't done the signage yet.
That's under item 4, yeah. It is further comments on item 4 under explanation. Go
So
ahead.
Pat, your point is that you're wondering if it's worth actually visiting in person to look over these. But I think your question is also about whether or not there's any oversight from the board on the small. I feel like there are two questions on the table.
Yeah.
Unless I'm getting confused.
Mhm. Yeah, let's just go back and see exactly what this was. Recommendation, CNC recommends that the portal and the staff spreadsheet show matching. No, that's the wrong one. Sorry. Number 2. The COC recommends project completions be verified. Projects should only be marked complete on the staff spreadsheet if they have been completed at the time the spreadsheet is submitted to the COC. So this is, part of it was just, is there a check mark there and is it really done or not? And I just,
Yeah, I feel like it's fine to rely on the check mark if it's there and to have that be our screening. It's interesting to be able to go to see the projects, but I don't think that that's a requirement.
and what staff is saying is that for the small projects, whether the check is checked or not, they don't think it's necessary to perform status checks on all projects after a member agency responds the project is complete. So I'm a little unclear about that, Mark. When they say it's complete, do they check the box?
Yeah, in our project template spreadsheet, when we push the spreadsheet out to the member agencies, there's a checkbox for complete yes or no. And
Were they answering it?
pardon me?
Were they complete? Were they either answering yes or no in every
Yes.
case?
Yeah.
So in every case, they do answer yes or no.
It's a, if I remember the form, I could double check, but if I remember the form, it's a yes completed or there's nothing there if it's not completed.
Okay, so if it's not thing, it's implied that it's not complete.
Correct.
Okay.
And and this was specific to a core project, but we also asked this on the local projects. And so that's where staff is, we have 100+ projects. For us to go and babysit and handhold the member agencies for completion is not a reasonable expectation.
Some of this feels operational to me more than high levels of governments. That seems kind of operational to me. And I would say we could just say, we could say agree implemented or just agree. And we can just agree with Mark's position, or we can say, no, they need to be more, needs to be more done. I, for one, agree with Mark's position on this particular case. I just think it's not a big deal.
I agree with that.
I'm not going to argue with it.
Sorry, Pat, I couldn't hear you.
I said, I'm not worth dying on this hill.
Okay, so are we good with just indicating, we'll just say, we will say agree. We'll just say agree. We won't say, Mark says partially agree, then we'll agree with Mark's partial agreement.
Yes.
Is that okay with you again? Okay. The next one, COC recommends an explanation column on the staff spreadsheet be used to provide an explanation as to why projects are over budget by 10% or more. So, you got the budget in the beginning. At the end, you report what you spent, right? And any place in the world, 90% of the time, you're not going to be within 10%. Certainly whenever I've done any construction around my house, it never came close to what they thought it was going to be. So the question is, does something being over or under budget make you uncomfortable? Or should the board get into it to say there's a red flag here, right? That's kind of what the question is, right? So Mark's response was disagree. Member agencies are increasingly providing valuable information related to challenges and or successes of individual local D-space and core projects, including explanations for overages in budget, changes in design, delays in implementation, et cetera. However, staff does not concur with the establishment of a threshold requiring explanations. Rather, staff supports explanations on an as-needed basis. So I guess that we're saying is that when you come to the end of, at the beginning of the year, you set your budgets, right? And there's a whole bunch of effort that surrounds that. Then you get to the end of the year and you summarize where you were, and there's dialogue, right? But there's no specific requirement to say if it's over 10, I want a paragraph. If it's under 10, I don't. It's just something that evolves based on everyone's knowledge of it because they're living this every day.
And if I can, it's probably an explanation I should have included in this comment is that, like I said earlier, a lot of these projects are forever projects. So let's use the Santa Fe San Anselmo fuel reduction zone. That project is going to take years. Let's say for the sake of argument, they budgeted $500,000 for fiscal year 24-25, but they ended up spending 550,000 or 560,000, knowing that they're going to keep doing it, but they had the opportunity to keep moving forward.
Right.
I really don't think it's necessary to have the explanation that when they went 10% over on a project, it's going to continue from year to year to year.
And the board isn't, I don't watch the board meetings, but the board is sufficiently engaged from those of you who watch board meetings to say that are they providing a reasonable diligence on progress?
On a case that's similar to, in that case, should Santa Fe say, hey, we want to spend 60,000 more, what they end up doing is they work with our staff to write a staff report to transfer money from one of the projects from that project to fund the overage.
Or they can work off their backlog, right? Because
Or they
got a
work off the
rollover.
backlog.
Yep.
Yes.
So what do we feel our response should be to the staff disagreement? Should we agree with the disagree? Or should we push for the suggestion to add formal commentary for anything that varies by more than 10%?
You know, this is as to why projects are over budget. We want to change that a little bit and say why completed projects, ongoing projects, as Mark is saying, could easily go over budget from year to year or under budget from year to year because they're so long. And perhaps the only thing we're really concerned about is the completed project to see whether that came significantly under or significantly over and why did that happen?
So that would be a new comment, but that's okay. We can make a new comment this year.
Yeah.
Again, that goes to me, operational versus.
I'm not married to, I'm only offering.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
I'm struggling with that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. It could just be noted, this completed project was such percentage either over and under, and it could just be a note. And then if anyone wants to question why, that could come up on a one-to-one basis.
So what do they currently receive at the end of the year? In their summary of how things went? The board, yeah.
Basically the exact form that you saw that says X amount was budgeted, X amount was spent, and what the difference was. That's what they get.
So they have the difference available if they want to make inquiries. So is that adequate?
Yeah, I think it would be.
Okay, so that exists.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. You know, if we were the only oversight, it would be a different story. But as I said in my previous, we have two levels of oversight
right,
here.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so where are we on this one?
I just want to say with your two levels of oversight, the board isn't overseeing the board. If we're talking about the board, I don't know how to explain this.
But there's also the ops guys, right? So the ops committee is looking at all the stuff too, right?
I don't really know whether once the ops committee meeting happens, whether they watch the board meeting or not.
Is there a summary for the ops at the end of the year also?
Correct.
So they have a summary at the end of the year also. I'm
And a preview. I mean, they go through the work plan as it's in development too, which for the continuing projects would be
Yeah.
part of the conversation.
So both, there's three together. What's the name of the, one's gone now. It's no longer.
Advisory Technical Committee.
Okay, so that one's gone. That's very good, but it's not Brown Act. So now we have the Ops Committee and we have the board both getting a report at the beginning of the year in terms of what the plan is. That's how they battle it out. And then at the end of the year, they get a summary as to where things stand. And within that summary, they see what actual spend was compared to budget.
And actually, the financial staff, the ATC, and the operations staff gets biweekly updates of that spreadsheet throughout the whole year.
Okay.
Could I ask
So-
a question?
Sure.
So it seems to me the issue is you agree that there should be some threshold that should prompt some additional comments. If you're not comfortable with the 10% that was suggested here, could you give us an example of what you say would be an as needed?
As needed would be, and it might even be less than 10%, where a project was budgeted at 1 million. And let's say it was a completed project and it went over by $90,000, that might be worth exploring why that did. If we, depending on the description of the project, I'm just not a fan of this. And I'll say it, an arbitrary 10%, especially since 10% is a really small number.
So Marcus, part of your view, because living and breathing this, your sense is that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm going to. Your sense is that the board is doing their job and they're keeping an eye on everything.
That would be my sense, yes. Especially since whenever we are, every time a budget does go over, a project goes over budget, and which we have a zero-sum budget. So if we're over budget in one spot, that means it has to be taken from another spot. There's a staff report that goes to the board to authorize the movement of that money from one budget to another.
Okay. I would suggest we accept Mark's suggestion in that case.
Okay, what do you think?
Yep.
Okay, I'm good with that too. What do you think? Okay, consensus? Okay, good.
And
Right.
wouldn't the next one be almost exactly the same?
Yes, exactly, right. I'd say C response to number 3, and I'd say C response to number 3 for number
There you
4
are.
to move things along. Thank
Okay,
you very
so-
much.
Put that to bed.
Okay. Now, number 5, the famous demonstration gardens. So COC recommends projects such as demonstration gardens should be tracked and evaluated to capture lessons and show effectiveness, including remeasurements of results to assess value prior to approval of similar projects. COC notes several additional demonstration gardens in upcoming work plans. They say they partially agree. Let's see, staff believes the existing processes satisfy the recommendation. During meetings of member agency staff and advisory technical committee meetings, discussions regarding effectiveness, lessons learned, and whether similar projects should be replicated occur. So it's, you have a dialogue is what you're suggesting.
Yeah, it happens both in the formal ATC meetings, but also in the informal meetings of the network of revenge management specialists. And I'll use just to get different topic than the demonstration gardens, but the fire road inventory that Novato did. The rest of the member agency said, that's a really good idea. Maybe we should be doing that through the rest of the JPA. And that conversation happened in an informal environment, got brought into the formal environment, and that's how it turned into a new project. So I do believe, that's why I said partially agree. I agree with that process, or I agree that lessons learned and sharing that information, but where the partially disagree came into play saying, I think we already have it.
So you don't want to have formal written reports. You think that's just paperwork?
Correct.
Okay.
And I think the response surfaces information that wasn't reflected in the original recommendation, so it answers it.
Okay, so are we good with that one? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so that covers the
Cool.
core. So now I go on to local. Let's see here. There. Okay, so for local, again, we went through, and we've seen all this before. We went through each of the groups and, did those 4 tests and went through that whole process. And they did not raise any additional new items. The conclusions basically were pretty positive. And you saw this at our last meeting. I think those words are all the same. So what's new is, again, follow up on prior years. So, the COC believes that each member agency should immediately provide an updated 2-year attestation. Staff agrees, it's been implemented, and we say, cool, it was implemented. Recommendation number 7, don't give out future local funds, and if they're not in timely compliance, and they have a policy for this, and the COC agrees it was implemented. In fact, we see evidence in the case of, this is local, yeah.
Fairfax.
Yeah, in Fairfax, with Fairfax, where you withheld
Yeah.
some money. Let's see, the next one, 8. Oh, this is the interesting one. COC recommends the board conclude and conduct an annual review of each of the member agencies' expenditures activity level and the compliance of individual expenditures with the tax measure and the JPA agreement. Local funds are not merely a pass-through. Disbursements of tax proceeds without MWP oversight. The board may have observations on the effort and any duplication between board and core programs for selected member agencies, but the efforts of individual member agencies should both be reviewed and accepted by the board. So staff said they agree. At the end of each fiscal year, the board of directors receives an update on the status of all core projects. If directed, staff can include the status of local and defensible space projects as part of the same process. We wrote, not observed requires follow-up, because you didn't say we will, you had said if directed, and you haven't been directed yet. So I thought that was kind of a little bit of a slat of words, to be honest about it.
Well, the reason why was because our opportunity to do it had expired. So
Okay.
that the board of directors received this after we closed out that fiscal year, so we lost that opportunity
I
to
see.
be able to do that.
Okay.
So I planned, and I was directed by the board to bring this information to them. So when we close out 24-25, that will be your opportunity to observe that occurring.
Okay.
Okay. Should we perhaps, if you can commit to us that that is your intention, you just said if directed, staff can conclude. You didn't say you have been directed. So, and that's your prior thing. So I can't change that. We can't change that. But under the COC comment, you could add a statement to say that you told us this and we consider it closed.
Happy to. Well,
Okay.
if I were you, I wouldn't consider it closed till you see me do it.
Okay. Well, why don't we do it this way? Not observed. And then you can put your statement and say, I'm going to do it. And then we'll just say requires follow-up.
Perfect.
Should we say not observed? Should we say not observed because of the timing of last year's report?
That's a good way to do it. I like that. How about that way?
I just don't want it to look like it was not
Yeah,
observed
good
because of
point.
an omission and.
I think that's great. Why don't we just change it to say not observed because of the timing of the issuance, like you just suggested? That's a really good idea.
That's a good idea.
I like that, instead of having you give me a bunch of
Perfect.
stuff. Okay, good.
Less work
Excellent.
on my part.
Okay. Let's see, what is this one here?
Can we also say we'll take this up next year or whatever that indicates that,
We'll do so going forward.
24-25.
yeah, that we, as if you just say not observed because of timing of the board, that
Issuance of the document.
that sounds like,
True.
I think we should put in a statement of, we'll observe.
It's very short.
Yeah, it could be very, very short, but,
So the idea we're trying to get to is to say, okay, they couldn't do it last year. I think it's okay to say that the executive officer has indicated he intends to do it this year, and we will observe it this year.
that's fine.
Okay, good. Number 9. Oh, this is the thing about baseline, right? Yeah, so higher level of service, we have a requirement for higher level of service to make sure that, as an example, Mill Valley's was spending about, I think it's around 300,000 on veg management historically. And we as council members have committed, that's what we intend to spend. So that means you can't just take MWPA money and say, oh, there we go, funded, right? You have to spend more than 300, right? It has to be incremental. That was what the requirement of higher level of service is. So we get a statement from everybody that says, yes, this is a higher level of service, but there's no way to measure that if there's not a baseline. This baseline data was supposed to be collected. It's been around 4 years now, but it's not done yet. So it's going to be done soon is the quote from the executive director. And we just say not observed requires follow-up.
Correct.
Okay. Now the Rangers.
Now, Mark, do you have any idea when that will, this is getting absurd.
When your executive officer finally gets it done, that's what it is. I'll fall on the sword on that. It's me. I just
Okay.
need to get around to doing it.
Okay,
All right.
thank you, Mark.
Okay. Just remember that sword will be sharp next year.
I know.
Okay. Next one is with regards to the Rangers. So, we suggested that the police rangers in all likelihood perform other tasks beyond ignition reduction. COC believes that JPA expenditure should be used for ignition reduction only. We suggested a formal report be given to the board describing all ranger activities and how the expenditures are allocated between the JPA and other activities. So I was there. I mean, I called in for it, right? And indeed, there was a presentation made, check box there, but there was no discussion about how expenditures should be allocated. So we wrote, you guys said staff partially agrees. We say partially agree. Staff made a presentation to the board in February 20th, 2025. Their presentation displayed the significant value the dedicated officers provide to the communities served. There's no squawk that this is good. This is not good work. The board did not discuss the specifics of how or whether to allocate expenditures between the JPA and the jurisdiction's cost after the presentation. COC notes that these are armed, trained police officers, and the COC continues to believe that they are, in all likelihood, performing other police tasks beyond ignition reduction, and that costs should be allocated rather than fully recovered from Marin Wildfire. This is a baseline effort that any city would expect of their police services that should be considered when addressing the requirements that reimbursements achieve a higher level of service. Other jurisdictions also use sworn officers to patrol homeless encampments without reimbursement by Marin Wildfire. In addition, these patrols occur year-round. The risk of wildfire ignition is greatly diminished during the rainy season. We acknowledge staff's statement that a precise allocation of costs based on some sort of cost study would be difficult. This does not exclude the board making a common sense decision to reimburse 50%, 25%, or another percentage of costs rather than accepting the staff practice of deciding to cover 100% of costs. The COC continues to believe that sharing of costs is fair to taxpayers. We consider this recommendation open until such time as the board makes a specific formal decision about cost sharing, whether at whatever percentage they think is reasonable, including 100%. So this was what we discussed at our last meeting, but I have updated the words a little bit more to make them a little more precise. So wanted to give everyone a chance to react to that, right? Because it's all six of us, all four of us involved here. I could exclude the including 100% because that's a little bit. So we know that the board makes policy decisions. We don't make policy decisions. That's not our job. That's the board's job. So I personally think that 25 or 50% would be a reasonable number. I would be really pretty bothered if they went to 100%, but I'm not sure if I'm supposed to second guess the decision-making of the board. So how do we feel about the words in general? And should I exclude the parenthetical at the end, including 100%? Because I'm tipping our hands a little bit there.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to jump in on this too, and it's really a question for you all, having done more of these reports than I have. But, the partially agrees on the COC could mean part of the COC agrees too. Not all of us. I watched the presentation too. I heard you call in. From my perspective, the ignition reduction is not just about squashing any, ignition at that moment, but it's a bigger systemic piece. And so everything that the Rangers do, to me, seems like it ties into the program in a fairly justifiable way. I even think about the sort of year-round piece of it, in the reality that we just saw these fires in LA in January. We don't really have fire seasons anymore, so I don't have a problem with the year-round piece of it. So I wouldn't go to the 100%, 25%, 50%, because I'm actually comfortable with the Rangers being covered by Marin Wildfire, but I also know that I might be a total outlier. So I just don't, I guess my question to the committee is, do we need to have consensus on every statement that we put in and every single response? Or is it okay to be representing it as part of the committee?
So you can certainly have a minority viewpoint on anything that we're doing. We
Yeah.
look for the majority viewpoint.
Yeah.
I would push back on what you said in a number of ways.
I thought you might.
Yeah, so, you know, LA is different than San Francisco, I mean, than the Bay Area, right?
That is true.
When we have 5 years of drought, maybe you can make some sort of argument about that. And I agree that there is a dotted line between fire reduction and police activity, but it's not a 100% straight, it's not 100% straight. In other words, you know, these are sworn police officers, they're carrying weapons, they're social working, they're doing lots of different things, and they're not just putting out fires. And as a taxpayer, it always bugs me when we say, I'll give you money for this, and then it ends up doing more of that. And so these are related to me, but they're not straight line. And that's why I'm troubled, particularly in Marin, where it does rain most every winter, you know, that these activities are in excess of simply stopping fires. And the fact that every police department in Marin is interacting, sadly, with unhoused people. That's part of what they do. And once you crack the door open, this was one city, and then now I believe it's 2 cities, right? Because, you know, budget attracts, you know, money attract, but you know, it's how budgets work. So again, respectfully, I think that 100% to me is beyond the pale. A percentage less than 100, maybe it's 50, maybe it's 25, but I think I would, as a taxpayer, if I was the opposition and really wanted to point at something that says this is wasteful, I'd go straight to this, right? So that's why I suggest a percentage lower. Yes.
There's another way to look at it. What we want the Rangers to do is help prevent fires, deal with homeless people that are camping, these kind of things. And the months that we're looking at are basically May through November. So perhaps the allocation is a 60-40. 60%, MWPA picks up 60%, 40%, which are the months of December, January, February. And you can argue that we'll have fire seasons all year round. I know that, but the core fire season, we're really looking at May to November. So we say it's fair enough to say, and I'm just throwing that number out, 60% seems reasonable in this case for the MWPA to be covering that expense, even though we know they're going to be doing other things out there during those 7
Yeah,
months.
so my thought is that it's the board's decision to make a decision. If I was a board member, I would say, I could argue with you about the 60% or the 40%, but I'm not a board member. So
Right.
I think what we want to do is to say, elevate this to the board to have a robust conversation about allocation, not simply about the value of the program, because the program is highly valuable. There's no doubt about it. If I lived in Santa Fe and I knew that part of my city property taxes were going to pay police officers who are now focused on this difficult problem, I'd feel good about it.
Right.
But not 100%, because I know in Mill Valley, I've gone on ride-alongs. It's a thing that they do regularly in Mill Valley as part of their day-to-day police services. And, you know, police services represent, you know, 30% of the total city budget. So, so what you said makes sense to me, but I think we're the wrong group to be having that level of dialogue. I just want that dialogue to happen.
But
Mine is a recommendation
Yeah.
rather than, yeah.
And it sounds like if it's the dialogue that we want to have happen, we can say that without percentages, whether it's seasonal or whether it's the time that they're spending doing things in a given day. I think you could still make the recommendation without adding a recommendation of percentage.
Well, I didn't say a specific percentage. This was, one of the arguments was, look, we're not going to do a cost study to determine this. That was one of the positions of staff, right? So I'm saying, fine, that's cool. I get that. It's going to, you know, you're not going to walk around and say, oh, this 20 minutes was on fire prevention. These 30 minutes were on social services. And, you know, it's also too many things are happening when that officer is interacting with the unhoused people, you know, and so my suggestion was just do something you think that makes common sense. That's the way we described it. So I said, this does not exclude the board making a common sense decision to reimburse 50, 25, or another percentage, rather than accepting the staff practice of just covering 100%. So we believe the cost sharing is fair to the taxpayers. We consider this recommendation open until such time as the board makes a specific formal decision about cost sharing at whatever percentage they think is reasonable. So I would drop including the 100% and just make that our make that our finding.
Or say something about allocate during active fire months. That.
I don't want to pick them how they want to do it. There's lots of ways to.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
There's lots of ways to, lots
Sure.
of ways to skin the,
Mhm.
you know.
The cat, as they.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But I just think they have to have a dialogue and come to a decision. And I don't like non-decisions being considered because there was a presentation. Well, the presentation didn't involve our point, which is how much money should be MWPA and how much money should be local budget.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
So where are we at this juncture?
I agree with taking out the including 100%.
And the other words, the rest of the words you're good with?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What about you, Pat?
Yeah, I think I probably agree with take out the 100%.
Okay.
And I've always been a little bit bothered by the fact that I know they're not doing
Yeah.
fire stuff all the time.
Yeah, they're doing other good
I
stuff. Yeah.
appreciate you can't follow them around and say, what are you doing? But there's got to be some mechanism for making, if nothing else, making them aware that they're that their salaries aren't 100% paid by wildfire funds.
Okay, right. So do we have a consensus at this point?
John, I would just add one thing that you could almost take out the 50 and 25 and
I
just,
think you could.
just remove that
Take out that sentence.
and just take that part out.
You could, you
And
could,
we're suggesting a percentage.
Okay.
you could
instead
go
of-
from the first
instead of
sentence to
even
the
making a
last.
Suggestion. Thank you, Jenny.
Yeah, you could go from the first sentence to the last, and then you don't make that recommendation. And I do want to just go on record saying that I see theories of change that are very complicated and not linear. And I still think we should be open to the possibility that the dotted lines are also important. But I'm just going to respectfully lodge that, and it's
Yeah.
fine if we don't come to an agreement on that. But I think we could be a little bit pithier in this last paragraph.
Okay, so you would say this does not exclude the board from making a common decision to reimburse a percentage of costs rather than the whole thing. Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah, because it's almost like we're making the recommendation 25 and 50.
Well, I was trying to make a hint like,
Well, it's a hint. It's
yeah,
a recommendation.
I'd feel a lot better at 25, but whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's fine. I'll think that's great. Do we have a consensus around that?
Yeah.
We good with that? Okay, sounds good.
And Mark, answer a question for me. They are sworn police officers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're fully trained.
I
They,
just always sort of had this vision of them being kind of like park rangers.
Well, even park rangers can be what's called post-trained
Yeah,
police officers. Yeah.
these guys, they do arson inspections. You know, if there's crime on the site, they'll deal with the crime on the site because there can be lots of other kind of crime on these sites. They deal with all that stuff,
Yeah.
right? So that's why I believe it's more of it's a police function to me.
And I'd say if you haven't seen the board presentation, it's worth it. It was interesting to me how many fires had actually been started too, that they had been able to catch and
Right.
curtail. So it's worth paying attention.
That was a
Yeah.
very good presentation. I was very impressed by it.
On both counts, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if I lived near one of them, I'd be very happy to have them around there, but.
Right.
Okay,
I
so,
lived near one of
yeah. So we ready to move on?
We are.
Okay, so that brings us to D space, right? Okay.
Oh, you still have recommendation 11 and 12.
Yeah,
Oh, then I'm
I
sorry.
was gonna say one more.
Apologies. Let's go back here. This is local. There. Oh, this is this percentage thing about, okay, so this was, when you have people doing stuff part-time, the concern was that there is not a specific percentage on the document that says where they go. And Mark, you disagree. Summarize your disagreement, please.
Let me refresh my memory, John.
Yeah.
So every member agency that has a quote project that includes personnel, I send them an annual memo that says, you have these people that are on the books and that are receiving Marin Wildfire funding. What is their percentage of time spent on Marin Wildfire? What is spent on their time for other things? And then I get a response back from those member agencies that says, for this employee, it's 100% of the time. For this employee, it's 80% of the time. For this, and so I feel like we're already meeting that recommendation.
And what we said was the staff report prepared for the COC on results of projects includes a column to report the percentage of each requested employee's funding. A reasonable allocation of percentage should be agreed upon, presented to the board and accepted. Follow-up required. So I think it's their concurrence with that we're looking for, a specific documented concurrence.
I'm not quite following because I do each year for the agencies that have staffing, I send them a document or request, and these are the positions, and then they send me a response on what their percentage of time is spent on Marin Wildfire related items or not.
So does the board approve that?
No, they approve the work plan.
And so the work plan does not have this information in it.
Now I'm tracking what you're asking.
Okay.
I'll have to do a little bit of research to see for the positions that are shared. I'd have to do some research to see if that we include that, and I could definitely modify that.
Okay, so this was your prior comments. I don't think I want to mess with it, but so we're just suggesting that the board have vision into that, and when they approve the work plan and the results at the end of each year, they can see those percentages.
But your recommendation said there is a general lack of evidence in Marin Wildfire files to validate consistently that personnel costs were allocated only to wildfire prevention. Only 5 member agencies were reviewed. It is likely this information is lacking for the other 12 member agencies that were not reviewed.
This was this is in the prior year.
Right. So so that's why my response had nothing to do with whether or not the board approved it in the work plan, because that was not your recommendation. So you're responding, this year's finding is responding to my response from last year. And so that would be, if you include that, then I would respond to that in your next report.
Okay, let me see here. There's a general lack of evidence in the files to validate consistently that personnel costs were allocated only to wildfire prevention. Although only 5 of the agencies were reviewed, it was likely this information was also lacking from the other 12 member agencies which were not reviewed. So are you suggesting that the 23-24 local review, which we just did, has percentages for each person, and that because local is not reviewed by the board at all right now?
But even the local positions, I get that. I get the letter. Whether they're funded by local DSpace or core, I include their people that are being funded by Marin Wildfire money, and they give me the percentage of what they're doing.
So this also wraps up into our other comment that local should be reviewed by the board, right? Which is earlier in this group, right?
Correct, but this specific recommendation is not that. And if you remember, I'll go back for you. It was because at the time that this was written, we weren't getting the data from specifically San Rafael PD on the amount of time that their officer was spending. During the writing process, that's when I got the data from San Rafael PD, which you guys did not have an opportunity to review until this year.
And it's 100%, right?
Yes.
Okay. So if we suggest a reasonable allocation of percentages should be agreed upon, presented to the board and accepted, why can't we continue to say that? Because
I'm not saying you can't, but I'm saying that I would then if that's what you put, you were asking why I did not put that in my previous one, because that wasn't part of the question. And so this would be a new response from me for the 24-20 or 23-24. This recommendation on 11 was from the 22-23 report.
right?
And so you're writing a 23-24 report. So my response to the 23-24 report could include the reasonable allocation of percentage should be agreed upon, presented to the board and accepted. But that wasn't part of the question in the 22-23 report. That's why it wasn't addressed.
So how would we change what we've written?
I'm not suggesting you do.
Okay,
We'll
good.
just respond to it.
Okay, okay, sounds good. 12, and it says C 7 and 11. 12 is repeat of 7 and 11, right? Yeah, so we good with that? Just see the others, okay. Okay, so now we're working hard here today. So now we move on to D space, right?
Mm-hmm.
And D space, okay, I think D space is easier. We have a nice write-up about how the DSA works and San Rafael and Marinwood and Nevada Fire Protection District, and we say basically, this is really getting good. Right. Each year, each program establishes inspection goals, they're all tracked. Each of the 3 D space and fire resistant structure evaluation programs stays within the requirements to use no more than 10% administration. We asked our questions. Staff and the COC review team are confident that everything is honky-dory. We've seen this already. And what's new is the responses to prior year. The COC recommends the accounting better clarify the income and expenses allocated to D-Space Alliance is separate from MCFD, and they agreed, and it's happened, right? So we agree that this has been implemented. There's no issues there. So that's that.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Can I brag a little bit real quick?
No,
only if you're quick,
no,
because we had to be done by 4,
It's,
right?
it's quick.
Okay.
Jenny and I happened to be at the same meeting yesterday, and defensible space inspections was mentioned, or the whole, defensible space inspections and compliance in relation to insurance was mentioned, or was a topic of conversation. And without me saying these words, we were considered the gold standard. And this is a statewide group.
I'm sure that's probably true.
I'll jump on top and say that it wasn't just a gold standard for the state either. There are people from all over who are there and paying attention, and so grateful for the chance to be able to look at Marin as an example of where everybody else could be headed and what they're trying to do. So
Reminds me of Mill Valley evacuation planning.
Yes.
yeah, there you go. Made
and
me
I'll
very
mention
proud to be
that
a Marin resident.
Mark will be speaking on this subject on April 8th to the Climate Action Working Group at Marin Conservation League that morning.
He's trying to remember what's on his calendar.
Yeah,
I seem to be
I do
catching-
remember. Yes, I just, yeah. I remember.
Because we just sent out the newsletter. That's
Yeah.
why I know Mark.
It's confirmed.
Yeah, I hope so. We have you listed.
So, okay, so that brings us to where we are
Mhm.
and how comfortable we are that our subcommittee of 3 can bring this thing to the finish line without another set of review by the full group.
Mhm.
And I'm okay either way. Are you guys, how do you feel about the direction we've been given? And it's on recording, so I guess we can go back and look at it to make sure we get it all right. But with this level of editing suggested and the understanding that we're just going to drop these sections into the prior boilerplate and make sure we have at least one picture of a goat in the document.
I'll try to get a new one for you. How's that?
That sounds good.
Yes, do get us a new picture of a goat.
It's a long running joke. And our overall conclusion basically was pretty vanilla, right? It said, except as noted above, funds were managed and spent appropriately. The CSC has not observed any information suggesting that core local or dispense programs for fiscal year 23-24 are inconsistent with the agreement and the tax measure. So that's our overall conclusion.
And the D-Space report concluded the same thing that your colleagues from all over the state and country, and now I can't find it.
Yeah, each of the 3 sections does have some relative conclusionary language within it,
Yeah.
which I think is okay, particularly since we have actually no new findings. We're just following up on old findings, right? So,
And you keep using the word findings in place of recommendations.
yes, exactly.
Yes.
And that's why we have a writing committee, which will correct my poor English language
Yes.
skills.
And just so you know, past president McMillan has drafted her letters and sent it in to me. So we'll be able to button it up pretty quick.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I was gonna say that was the one thing that I know I put into the template last year. I
Right.
haven't seen yet.
Right, right. And we don't weigh in on that. It's just, it's her letter, so,
Yeah.
you know, so she can say whatever she wants. So how do we feel? Would we like to go and assemble it and then present it like as a consent item at the next meeting? Or are we comfortable just trying to get this thing out the door? I'm okay either way.
Well, I'm having worked with Joanne on the graphic design before.
It's not an easy thing.
It's, yeah,
Right.
what I was about to say is you can't guarantee that this will be done by the next meeting. Depends on what else she has on her schedule, because she doesn't sit around waiting for us to. She makes a living doing this with other people too, so.
So Mark, how lined up is she? Do you think we'll be able to, if we got the green light to get this thing punched out, would we be in a position to get it punched out? Or would we realistically not have it until the next meeting anyway?
Unlikely. I think the timing would be more like it would be next meeting. I don't think I could get out before that. And then
So in other words, if we got it done and it's only a week from the next meeting, we don't lose a lot of time letting it go to the next meeting as a consent item and just looking at it just to make sure there's no wackiness in it.
and to your point, John, we're not likely to have a board of directors meeting in April, so it wouldn't go to the board until May anyway.
Okay.
And for whatever, I'm not worried about, I mean, I know you all have been noting the things that we wanted to change and everything. I don't think that there needs to be another meaty discussion around the content, but I will say there were several rounds of copy edits last time, and I'm happy to take a fresh look if that's helpful, having done a few rounds last
Well,
year.
Yeah, I looked at it at the very end and we had a couple of things you just couldn't get changed. We had all the logos and I really wanted to put it at the end, but he said, I can't do it.
Yeah. So
I
anyway,
think
you don't need
as
more
we
clerks, but
have
fresh eyes.
done this more and more, it's a little easier because the boilerplate is,
Good. Yeah.
um, I'm a little bit more concerned as to who is going to do this.
So we talked about the three of us, which we'd already done some assembly. Could we just three of us finish the assembly?
Well, yeah,
Because I think it's just basically dropping it in and
Is it
then,
easier for one person to do it than three people? It's a tough thing to do as a committee.
Yeah.
Every
Hey, Jenny.
person- Sorry. Every person who touches that document, it's easy to add unintended typos and everything else. It's actually easier at the point that the content is finalized separately. Having one person pull it together seems like the logical thing to do. I don't know that three people are needed.
I mean, I'm happy to get it to the end. And I agree that given the timing, you know, if we could knock this out and save several weeks, not having it re-reviewed at the COC level, I'd say let's get it out of our hair. But if in fact, realistically, it's not going to be ready until soon before the COC meeting anyway, then why not just have another, you know, cold review of it? And maybe as a consent item at the next meeting. I think that makes
is there
logical
any
sense.
Brown Act reason why one can't? Let's just assume that it gets done really fast. Is there any Brown Act reason why you can't send it out to? I guess there is, why you can't send it out to everybody.
We'd have to call a meeting. You'd have
Yeah.
to call a meeting.
We could have a special meeting.
Yeah, we could, but I don't know. Does it need to be that
Yeah.
special? Just acknowledging that I agree, it is difficult to do all this stuff. It's not
Yeah.
as easy as we think it is, having participated a little bit last go around at the end, because Kingston took the lead on this last time with you, right? Yeah, so
Yes,
are you happy with me trying to take a shot at it and then working with your person and then we'll present it at the meeting next month?
Yeah, and I'll try to make contact with John tomorrow.
Okay, we good with that?
yes.
Okay, so let's do that. And then you can catch any boo-boos in the meeting about I'll try hard.
Well,
We think we got it all here already. We already
I-
fixed all this stuff, right?
I would feel better if we have one more read through looking for,
Okay. So how about the three of us do one more read through reflecting the changes which we agreed to today? And then punch it out the door.
yeah, and you write up
Yeah,
whatever words we took.
right, exactly, right.
Okay,
Because I can go back to the video, because Martina, this gets poached up next day or two, right? The video? Yeah, okay, good. Good, great. Okay. All right, that sound like a plan?
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, Yahoo.
And there's no
Um,
public.
No public, good, okay. I mean, it is what it is. I encourage the public to call in. Okay, so now we moved on to board monitoring reports. Board of Directors.
Board of Directors. I was very, very happy to see, hear first of all, and now walk around and see the artwork from Cedars. And I asked my grandson if we gave him all the right words, would he do an artwork for Cedars for here? And he said, yes, he would. I don't know if you would like his artwork, but that was the first thing on the agenda for from the board meeting. And we have sort of, well, there were a whole lot of stuff that was on the consent calendar, and it all got passed, and I wonder if anybody had actually read it all. You know, that was, I guess one of the big things was the state emergency proclamation, which I think you have all probably heard about by now. I think, you know, most important for us is being able to do away with some of the bureaucracy of CEQA and the Coastal Commission, as Mark has said, still keeping our commitment to the environmental community. And Scott Farley gave he usually talks so fast that I don't know what he's saying.
Sometimes when he talks slowly, I don't know what he's saying.
Yes. But he was really talking about a data-driven approach. I think that's as, you know, as concerns us.
Okay. Executive Committee.
I'll add something, because I was there at the board meeting. The one interesting thing was the raising of the consumer price index. I almost said that incorrectly, by 2.7%, which generates another $500,000 to $600,000 according to my calculation, which is a good thing for sure going forward. And the other is, if you have a chance, the Fire Safe Marin report is very, very informative this month. That's an attachment there. So just wanted to mention those two things from the board meeting.
Great.
As well. And the CHIPPA program is back on track.
Executive Committee.
Who's responsible?
It's on the executive committee.
Was that Rebecca's?
It was a 26-minute meeting.
February 6th.
Okay, sounds good. Operations Committee. You did the operations.
I watched operations. I don't know if anybody else did, but governor's emergency proclamation was a big subject there too. And so I don't need to reiterate the points that we've already made, but I thought it was really interesting to hear, and it'll be important to track how that ends up influencing implementation of the projects. And then it rolled into talking about the work plan, presenting on what's anticipated for the year ahead, and then the LRA maps update. And those were the main points that were covered. So.
So I was supposed to do the finance committee, and I remember a couple of days ago looking at the finance committee agenda and saying, holy smokes, there's a lot of stuff there. I better watch that. And then, of course, I forgot to watch it. So I can't comment on.
Would you like me to
finance.
give you an update?
Could you please?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So
My boo-boo.
what we did on the finance committee meeting was, first of all, presented a staff report or a report from NBS, who does the collection for our taxes. And it gives us exactly how much we made by parcel, by zone. And so now then we set that as our actuals. And it also helps us set our percentages of revenue per zone. They haven't changed for the last 3 years. Then, since we have such a stable revenue source and that square footage of building space in Marin, it's easy for us to project. We simply add 2.7% because of the CPI. That created our budget framework. And so we know how much is going to go towards admin, how much is going to go towards D-space, how much is going to go towards local. And then that also creates how much is for core. Core, we leave alone because we have to wait for the operations committee to go. So that's why we call it our framework. And so those values were all approved. And it'll be about a $22 million budget.
And are you interested, was there any commentary that discussed burning off continuing to burn off the rollover?
There was no commentary. It's understood that that's our goal.
Okay. And because this is year 5, and you got to hit your 80s, right?
And we're only one zone is 1% below it.
Right. Okay.
Which zone?
Southern Marin.
I know there's going to be some spending there this next year. Any further comments on finance?
Oh, yeah. When I should also mention that we made some amendments to our financial policies in the finance committee that were approved at the board. And one, I think that is of specific, they were our financial policies. So obviously the COC should be having eyes on that. But the one that I think you would really find interesting is in our disbursement policy, and is in regard to unspent money. Some of our member agencies have expressed a desire to have a restricted reserve in local and D-space. And so Marin Wildfire maintains a 15% of our annual budget restricted reserves for, this could be if there's a massive lawsuit against us or something happens. And so some of our member agencies have expressed a desire to do that. The only ones that would really want to do that are what we are considering are larger entities. That's 4%. And we actually have a definition of a large versus small entity, and it's 4% of population or more, you're considered a large entity. Less than 4%, you're considered a small entity. So we wrote in the disbursement policy the availability to create a 15% restricted reserve fund. But we also said that if you carry more than a year's worth of revenue for 2 years, the board could say, okay, we're going to withhold your next local disbursement and we're going to put it into the core for the zone that you're in to help motivate spending rather than sitting on spending.
So that'd be a change in the JPA agreement.
It would be,
Because the JPA agreement requires
yeah,
2020 2060.
it's in a fuzzy area, but we're just trying to create motivation.
Okay.
We're trying to create motivation not to sit on the money. And currently, nobody has done that. We're just trying to create that motivation not to have that happen.
And what happens in year 10 if we're unlucky or there's no interest in pursuing another re-up of the measure, then it just spins off in year 11, right?
Right.
Yeah. Any questions?
And then any capital would have to be liquidated.
Right. Any questions? Okay, so yes, no?
And I'm just curious, as you've raised that question, is there a committee working to get the measure renewed?
We have one of the board members has volunteered to be the chair of a re-election committee, and we're working towards that.
Okay.
Yes,
It's still a little early, right?
we're eyeballing 28.
That makes sense. Yeah. Okay, so next is annual report committees. Now that's actually repetitive of what we just did, so we don't really need to do that. And that brings us to committee members' requests regarding future agenda items. So I have a suggestion for our next meeting. So I think we should meet in a month because at some point we're going to have a spot where we don't need to meet for a while. Right. I think we should meet in a month, to review our final report as issued. And then I think at that meeting, I think we should agendize, our committees vary each year because they're not standing committees. So maybe we can come to the next meeting considering who wants to do core, D-space, local, right? So we can start getting that process started. I think we could have some opening dialogue about our approach for the next cycle because we made some decisions, like some of the things I think, not to pre-do the meeting, but, I think we tend to look at 5 in local each season. That seems reasonable. I think our approach generally, I think we would want to at the next meeting discuss how we do core because core, we did it differently. Like this year we said, let's just look at the small stuff. The year before we read everything. So let's come to that meeting kicking around an approach for core. So I think those would be good things to accomplish. And then I think because we start a new chair in July, right? I think that we'll be doing this in April. I'm not sure we need to meet after that meeting for a while. So let's just come to the meeting and see where we are.
Right.
But you might be in a position where you can choose who the next chair is. Although there's also a question as to whether we're going to have our full 9 bodies. So there's definitely things to talk about the next meeting. I would hope that after that next meeting, we could have a period of quiet where we don't have to meet again until we get past fiscal year end and we start doing our work, would be my thought. But that's for us to decide next meeting. But I think those are all worthy things to discuss at our next meeting. Any other requests regarding future agenda items? Okay, I know one of us has a dinner to go to, so I would suggest that we move to item 11, adjournment. If there's no concern, I'd like to adjourn our meeting formally. Okay, meeting's adjourned. Bang.
Bang.